Hello there, welcome to our Bible study video. It's good to have you with us today. We're studying in the letter or the epistle that Paul wrote to the churches of Galatia, and we're in Galatians chapter 5. And I know many of you will have been watching previous episodes, and so I hope you find it helpful as we kind of run through this book and try and pick up some of the key features and lessons that we can learn today. Now we're moving into another section today. We're moving into chapter 5 verse 13 to 26. Now there was a choice in the previous section in verses 1 to 12, but it was the choice between the cross and circumcision, and the great debate running through Galatians, of course, is about whether you get saved by adhering to the law or whether that's impossible. We've discovered it's impossible, but we'll reinforce why that's the case in today's video. And so there's that great comparison made and contrast and the choice that has to be made. Of course, these believers in Galatia, they had not come to Christ on the basis of law. And we know that because when we read back in chapter 3, he asks them a series of questions. And he says, did you receive the Spirit by the works of the law or by the hearing of faith? Are you so foolish, having begun in the Spirit, are you made perfect by the flesh? So he's building on this. Now in chapter 5, the section we're reading is 13 to 26. We're only going to do an introduction to that section today. And there's another choice there. It's the choice between the flesh or the Spirit. Let me read just the introductory verse number 13. Or maybe we should read 13 and 14 just to kind of make it a complete statement as is here. For brethren, we have been called unto liberty, only use not liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another. For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, thou shalt love thy neighbour as thyself. So this section is really focusing on liberty. And we're going to think about the liberty that the believer has in Christ so that we can do a little bit of a recap on what we've dealt with so far in the previous parts of the book, and so that we can have a launch pad to move into this. It's not the final section, of course, we've got chapter 6 to do, but we're getting towards that. Now, John Phillips, in his translation, let me just pick up my iPad here. John Phillips, in his commentary, puts over this section the law of, let me just get it here, the law of likeness to Christ. The law of likeness to Christ. Now he divides the sections up like this. In the first half of chapter 5, or the first part of chapter 5, verses 1 to 15, the law of liberty in Christ. The section we're looking at, the law of likeness to Christ. Chapter 6, verses 1 to 6, the law of love for Christ. And chapter 6, verses 7 to 10, the law of life in Christ. Now, I've divided the chapter slightly differently. I've given it a broader section, 13 to 26, a choice, the flesh or the Spirit, but we're basically going down the same idea. So there is a major choice that is presented to the believers here in this section. Are they going to seek acceptance with God on the basis of their works? Or is the believer going to accept what Christ has done for them through grace and walk in the Spirit in light of that? Of course, that is picked up for us, isn't it, in verse 25. So in verse 25, he's going to say, if you live in the Spirit, that's the sphere in which you live. You've been brought into that through salvation. You've been brought into a relationship with God. You live in the Spirit. Let us also walk in the Spirit. So these are key verses and underlying ideas running behind the chapter. So there's the choice. Are you going to accept what Christ has done? Or are you going to seek acceptance with God by works? Now, of course, we've discovered in the previous part of this book that acceptance by works is not indeed possible. I just want to kind of recap on that. See, chapter 2, verse 16 says this, knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by faith in Jesus Christ. Chapter 3, which we've referred to already, verse 3 says, have you begun in the Spirit? Are you going to complete that by works? Chapter 3, verse 6 says this, Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him for righteousness. Then chapter 3 verse 11 says, no man is justified by faith in the sight of God, for the just shall live by faith. Verse 22 of the same chapter says, the law hath concluded all under sin, that the promise by faith in Jesus Christ might be given to them that believe. It's all about faith. It's about believing. The beautiful words of chapter 4, verses 4 to 6. God sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. We might receive the adoption of sons. Not work for, but receive. And because you are sons, God hath sent forth the Spirit of his Son into your hearts, crying, Abba, Father. And then at the beginning of the chapter that we're dealing with just now, in chapter 5, verse 1, it says, stand fast in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free. And verse 13, which we've read today, for brethren, you have been called unto liberty. Notice the focus running through all of those verses. Justified by faith, begun in the Spirit, believed and reckoned, living by faith, the promise of faith in Jesus Christ, that you might receive the adoption of sons. Stand fast in the liberty with Christ hath made us free. For brethren, you have been called unto liberty. Now, as we move into this section, we need to remember that's the background, that's the backdrop, that we are saved by grace through faith. But what we're going to learn in this section is we must not use that grace as a license, that liberty as a license to sin. But more of that as we follow on in the next episodes. Thanks for watching. I really do appreciate it.